stream, and I'm trying to see if it goes to both my YouTube channel and my Twitter. So I have no idea. But I assume it's going to go to either one or the other. I'm going to check right now before I even get started in this, at least to see if it's going somewhere. Hopefully on my YouTube channel, more important than my Twitter. But if I get on my Twitter as well, that'd be just Jim Dandy. So let's see here. Just say I'm going to YouTube. All right. Well, my roommate says it's going to YouTube. So let me just see where that is, and because this is a spontaneous, and I didn't promote it all or anything like that, so didn't even get a time to set it up. But I'll explain what I'm going over in just a second. Oh, it does. I see it. I do see it. Awesome. All right, so I'm gonna go in there and at least see if anybody has any questions in the live chat as I go. There we go. All right. So, anyways, as you guys know, I had Andrew Wilson on a couple days ago on the Non Sequitur show, and then I did a review for a video by Jim Bob, right? And a lot of people were kind of messaging me in the comment section, and they were talking about materialism and physicalism. Which, let me just get on record: materialism and physicalism, as far as I understand and even I care, are synonymous terms. I don't see any real distinction between physicalism and materialism. They used to be a little bit more of a distinction historically. So in historical context, it used to be generally more that physicalism was more of a linguistic thesis and materialism was more of a metaphysical thesis. So one was really more about how we talk about these things, and the other one was really how it relates ontologically. But nowadays, in contemporary analytical philosophy and just philosophy in general, you'll see the terms used interchangeably. I think most people prefer the term physicalism because it relates to physics. Materialism relates to matter. So either one's just fine, but I think people just generally prefer physicalism when I read the literature. But on the discussions about God, they tend to use materialism. Right? You ask somebody, are you a materialist? You don't ask them if you're a physicalist. But in the literature, I tend to see more physicalism. Be that as may, right? But either way, they're talking about the same thing. If you see physicalism, they mean materialism. If you see materialism, they mean physicalism. But somebody so there's been a few people that asked me in the comment section, well, what about abstract objects? What is this? What is it about materialism that allows for this, and what are they comprised of? One sec. And I think there was some misunderstandings when people are messaging me saying, "Hey, look, we have these discussions with atheists, and they're telling us that everything's physical. That means that dreams are physical, numbers are physical, abstract objects are physical." And no, that's not what it means at all. I don't know any atheist that does argue this. If you know of one, let me know. And except for T Jump, maybe, because I don't know what the heck T Jump argues for half the times. But the point of having the position of materialism is that everything that exists has a physical explanation for, as far as why something supervenes on something else, why something has caused an action that results in something differing from a previous state. So the mind, doesn't exist as far as a physical entity. It has no real ontological presence. It's not comprised of anything. Even in physicalism, that doesn't mean that there is some kind of component to the mental where you have things like atoms would comprise the material. Now, some people argued in panpsychism there are these packets of consciousness, and that's in panpsychism, which is it would resolve a lot of things when it comes to materialism. I do agree that panpsychism does make sense as far as would it resolve certain things in the mind-body problem? Yes. Do I think it's an over exaggerated way to go to try to solve it? Yes. I think it's I think it's kind of bizarre to say that, okay, there's certain quantified packets of consciousness that exist in all things that have matter, including rocks and stars and things of that nature. I just don't think that's the way to go. But theoretically, it would solve a lot of problems. But they're asking me like, well, how does the atheist account for abstract objects? And I thought I explained it. I really did. I thought I explained it pretty well on my last stream. And that was basically that when you have materialism, there is a thing out there called property dualism, and the property dualist is basically saying, hey, look, all things do reduce to some kind of physical causations, some kind of physical uh, being, so to speak. The universe, everything in the universe has some kind of physical property to it, and that in a reductivist approach, everything falls eventually down to some kind of physical explanation for in a metaphysical type thesis. But most people that I know, or at least have read in the literature that accept physicalism, also accept property dualism, which is not the same as substance dualism. I think people are getting confused. Substance dualism says there's very distinct two different substances. One of them is the physical, the other is the mental. And how they relate to each other, that's other theses out there. But there is two separate substances, they'll call them. But the property dualist doesn't say that. Property dualist says there's only one substance, the physical substance. There's another one called neutral monism, which is a third substance, which says it's something else, and that it comes from that. You have the mental substance and the physical substance, which is actually a pretty popular thesis. But even if you don't go so far as neutral monism, you just want to say, look, I accept property dualism. That just means that there's two properties that come from the physical, and one of those properties happens to be the mental. So you have all these things in the physical world that are called concrete particulars. These are instantiations of some kind of objective form if you're more of a Platonist approach. So these particulars means that they are things that could have been different in a counterfactual world. So in a possible world where you have something that is something that it must exist in all possible worlds, but a particular is just a contingent object that doesn't have to exist in all possible. As a matter of fact, it can, or would be necessary, but it at least must exist in one. So it could have been something different. So any possible world is a counterfactual world where conditions could be different. And so a particular, especially a concrete, which means a instantiated particular, that in some other world, things could have been different. A birth could have been completely different. Somebody could have not even existed in a possible world. An apple could have been green or instead of red, or blue or purple or whatever. Any kind of change that's not necessary, something that doesn't have to be. Certain things that have to be called necessary beings must exist in all possible worlds, and any sub possible world, any other possible world from a necessary being has to have those necessary entities in it, and that would be considered to be like the laws of logic, right? I think everybody would agree that the law of identity would exist in all possible worlds, but it's not a metaphysical necessity that an apple has to be green. So property dualism at least allows for that, and it basically is a more of a non-reductive physicalist approach that is not saying that everything we know has to be completely reduced to physical properties, because the mental can't be, abstractions can't be, and they're perfectly fine to have both theses. You can say, I'm a physicalist, I'm a materialist, but I'm a non-reductive physicalist that believes that not everything does reduce to the physical, allowing for property dualism, allowing for the mind, and allowing for abstractions. And so when I have these people message to me saying, well, I talk to atheists and they're just saying, oh, everything reduces to the physical, I think they're not allowing for types of physicalism, which are the more modern contemporary forms of physicalism that allow for these types of differentiations and allow for things like mental constructs. And so I'm wondering what atheists are out there just saying, hey, I'm a materialist, but not understanding reductive from non-reductive physicalism. I would think that, most atheists, that subscribe to materialism, and again, they don't have to, right? An atheist doesn't have to subscribe to materialism. I would argue that if you do subscribe to physicalism, that you are entailed and say, well, I wouldn't say entailed. Entailed implies a stronger connection, implies that you believe there's no God. Because you're saying that everything is reducible to a natural set. There are no supernatural beings. There are no just embodied minds, because the physicalists, at least, would agree that the mind cannot exist sans the brain. I think this is true. I think that a mind cannot exist without a brain, at least as far as biologicals. A biological has to have some kind of neurological function in order to have a mind. That's my position. Now, how that works, anybody's guess. But there are some questions to be raised from the physicalist point of view, and that if you have you have this extant possible world, so everything in this world, it's argued that if this particular world has some other world that's exactly like it, right, exactly the same in all aspects, then everything in those two worlds should be the same, including the mental states. If mental supervenes on the physical, such that, and they will call this brain fizz, that's the term that a lot of them use for this, brain fizz, is that if you have two exact possible worlds, then everything should be the same between them. Just like if you have two exact brains, all things being equal, ceteris paribus, if everything's equal, that they should have the exact same brain states, which I don't think is the case. I mean, that would mean that if you have two exact minds that are exactly like, then they should have the exact same dreams. They should have the exact same thoughts. They should be the exact same person, right? And this, this goes back to the whole transporter type thing in Star Trek. If you make a duplicate of something, which basically we all know by now by talking about Star Trek, if you destroy the original, you make a copy of it, you transport the copy. You're destroying the original person. You're making it into energy. You're transporting the energy, and the energy is being reconstituted in the form of material in the exact same way, right? That is a straight up reductionist, deterministic. I mean, that is literally saying that you are making an exact copy to the quantum level, and so you have the exact same identity, because we all know that in transport technology, the original dies. This has been long since established as canon. I pretty much, I think, either inside the Star Trek universe or at least outside. I don't know if it's canonized inside, but at least outside, the people that talk about it that recognize it, yeah, it's pretty well understood that you die. But if you have everything reconstituted exactly the way it was before, now you're alive again. You're resurrected, so to speak. But the non-reductive physicalists, which I kind of hold to, Jared said it's not outright canon, but it's understood. I think you're right. But I hold to a non-reductive physics point of view that there are just certain things that we cannot find that supervenes on the physical, and that's fine with that. What the supervenience physicalists would say is that we understand that there's a physical substrate, we understand there's a brain, and we understand there's mental properties, right? For property dualists, we understand there's mental processes that are going on. And the physicalist, the reductive physicalist, says that for every property that has a mental, the mental has to be influenced by the physical. There's a relationship between those two, such that the mental is dependent upon that physical, and there has to be something you can find that relates the two. So every mental state has to have a corresponding physical state that it can be reduced to. And I just don't think that is the case. Now, again, there's no right or wrong answer to these things, because these are unknowns. Nobody knows these things. These are all metaphysical theses. And so there are a couple ways around these types of things for materialism to show why I just don't think true materialism or physicalism is the case, at least not reductive physicalism. I do hold to ontological, materialism. I mean, I'm sorry, I hold to methodological materialism, but not ontological materialism. But there's an argument out there, and it's called the lone ammonia molecule argument, and it's by C.F. Kim in 1993. And basically, this argument goes something along the lines of, if you have a possible world that's exactly like ours, is exactly the same, everything is identical, but there's one minute difference, which makes it a possible world. It's a counterfactual world, meaning something has changed from our universe, something that could have been different. And in that possible world, there's one lone more ammonia molecule within the rings of Saturn. Clearly, that's not going to have any effect on us. You can argue, oh, gravity is, infinite, whatever. But the reality is that has no influence on us as our mental states. And you could put it even further out. You could put it past the Hubble's volume if you want, because clearly that's spatial temporally isolated. And so anything past our Hubble's volume will never come to us. We'll never see it. We'll never be influenced it, even gravity, nothing. Unless there's some kind of instantaneous connection. But that would, again, posit, much more complications when it comes to action at a distance. But even still, this is a philosophical question, not a physics problem. But that lone ammonia molecule on the rings of Saturn is not going to have any different, won't affect us in any way. But the physicalist is literally committing himself to saying that if you have a physical possible world that's exactly like us in all aspects, they should be exactly alike. But this little difference between that particular world, means that our mental states cannot be said to be the exact same thing. We necessarily can't conclude that the mental states are the same, because that possible world is different. It's not the same possible world. Only if it's a possible world is exactly like ours can we say that physicalism is true. If any duplicate of the world is exactly the same as ours, if that's the case, then physicalism would be true. If everything was the same and all things being equal, that the mental states were exactly the same way and had to be the same way. But we can also show that with minor differences between the possible worlds, we can't show that how that would have any effect on our mental states. So I don't think that the mental states really are beholden to the physical. I do think you need the physical to make them, though. But it's the same principle when you have like the emergence theory. The emergence theory is that consciousness emerges from the brain, and it's similar in a way to property dualism in some ways when it comes to that, or non-reductive physicalism, at least, in that there's this property that emerges because of the configuration of the neurons and physical substrate of the brain. Just like if you have an aggregate of hydrogen and electron molecules and oxygen molecules together, and they form water, so you get these H2O molecules, and you aggregate them all together, and all of a sudden you have this property that emerges from it called wetness, or at least the wetting as ability to wet something. Water is a wetting agent. But how did that property come about? One water molecule isn't wet or can't wet something, but the property comes about as an emergent property. It's called property emergence. And that's fine. Emergentism would get around a lot of the problems with hard determinism, without taking this type of reductivist approach to physicalism. And I think a lot of the atheists out there are running these emergentist arguments. They're saying, well, because Matt Dillahunty does too well, he's like, well, the mind just emerges from the body. Okay, I don't have a problem with that argument. I think that emergentism makes a lot of sense, and emergentism is a non-reductive argument, non-reductive physicalism. So you can appeal to emergentism, or you can appeal to supervenience physicalism, which just basically says that, hey, look, these higher level things that we have, these cognitive functions, they don't reduce just down to mere physical properties, physical things. And then we don't know why, right? The mind that gets in the whole mind-body problem. We don't know why there's a connection between the mind and the body, just like we don't know in non-reductive physicalism why there's a connection between the mental and the physical. But you cannot map the mental to the physical on a one-to-one. You can't map it. Sure, you can influence it, but you can't say, "Oh, I had a dream," and say, "Okay, by that dream, let me show you what the physical substrate looks like." Just like you say, here's a physical substrate. Let me show you what the dream is this going to produce. I don't think there's a way to map those two. Does that make sense? And that's a big argument that I have never really had anybody get around yet. How do we map the physical to the mental? If I have a brain and I can show you every single physical thing about that brain down at the quantum level, the reductivist has to show that it will produce a certain mental state, right? And that's exactly what would be going on in the transporter thing, right? The identity of the person who's being produced in that transporter, you know, and the same token, even in a transporter accident, all those things that were produced are they are the original in some way. They're just a modified form of the original, but they are that person. This is their brain state has changed because the physical state has something went wrong, so their mental state has changed. And we know this can happen, right? We know that people that have physical damage to their brains can have changes in their mental states. People are completely different personalities sometimes. They like certain things that they didn't like before. They have affinities to learn how to play music and instruments that they didn't have before, or lose it. Either way, we know that there's a relationship, but we don't think that there's a way to map conclusively one thing to one thing, a mental state to a proper physical state, and that's what a physicalist would require for a reductionist approach. But again, you can take a non-reductive approach, and I think this is where the crux of these arguments that people are coming to me on my YouTube channel, on my last video or last couple of videos, is that they're not understanding that there's a different types of physicalism, and you can be a non-reductive physicalist, you can be a property dualist, and still be an atheist, or not be an atheist. Either one beholds each other. You don't have to be an atheist if you subscribe to non-reductive physicalism. You only have to be an atheist, at least as far as epistemically, is if you hold to ontological naturalism or ontological physicalism, right? Because the ontological physicalists, the ontological physicalists would say that everything is physics. Everything is material. Now, and again, that doesn't exclude. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to exclude abstractions. The ontological physicalist still allows for dreams, just like an ontological naturalist admits that we have dreams, admits that we have abstract objects like numbers and sets, and what's called transcendentals like love and hate and those kinds of things. You know, how do you have a physicalist that says, oh yeah, love is reduced to just physical states? Well, sure, you can argue that it's a chemical, and sure, you can argue that love is contingent upon there being a biological substrate. I would agree with that, or at least some kind of substrate if you want to get into AI. But it's really, you can't have love as something that's independent of something physical. Something has to be doing the loving, so to speak, because it's an intentional verb. To love means that something is doing the loving as an intentional verb. So the ontologicalist who does subscribe to ontological physicalism would say, yeah, love still exists. It's still an emotion. It's not comprised of anything, but it is dependent upon physical existence, but not in a way that needs to be mapped where if you have the same physical existence and you could take a duplicate, that it will love the same way. It'll have the exact same feelings. You don't have to hold to that. And I think this is where a lot of the confusion comes in, and this is why a lot of the theists will be dishonest and say, "Oh, you're arguing materialism. How do you account for these transcendentals like love and things of that nature? How do you account for the abstractions?" And accounting is a completely different question. How do we account for something is a completely different question, because that's asking for a metaphysical accounting. Why is there something called love? Not how does it come about? We know love comes about through chemical interactions. But of course, there's always that missing piece of the puzzle, just like we have in the mind-body problem, is how does the physical create the mental? But nobody knows. The theist doesn't know either. They can have their views, they can have their theses on it, and I do as well. But they cannot say, oh, this is how it is for sure, because if they could do that, man, they would be famous. They would have solved the mind-body problem. Now, of course, there are ideas of how to get around the mind-body problem. There's many ideas about it, but nobody's ever fixed it. Nobody's ever solved it. So the atheists out there that are running these arguments, I think they should maybe just get a little. Man, I am tongue-tied. Just need to get a little bit more familiarized with their own arguments and understand emergentism, understand that there's different types of emergentism, but they basically consist of some kind of ontological physicalism, some kind of a property emergence from an aggregate of other types of physical objects, just like witness comes from water, and there's some kind of irreducibility of these emergent properties to some kind of physical substrate in a non-reductivist physicalist point of view. So if an atheist can do that, then the theist just loses all ground. And so these discussions that Jim Bob and other atheists are having out there on the topic, I love that they're having it, but I think that their viewers are being a little bit misled, because it's not some argument against atheism. And when Jim Bob says, "Oh, this is a bulletproof argument against atheism," I beg to differ. If it was bulletproof argument against atheism, then it would be very much more well known, and it's not. It's just, I think, a lot of misunderstandings of these topics, because philosophy of mind is very difficult. And I think that a lot of atheists and theists who talk about these subjects probably don't have any in-depth studies in it. I certainly don't have any, formal in-depth studies in any of these things. I took, my philosophy course was basically informal fallacies. But I mean, I've been reading these things for a decade now. So at least I'm familiar with the types of literature that's out there for the most part. Or at least, a good chunk of it. Thomas Nagel's "What Is Be a Bat" is a very good example of something that's been been around a very long time, to a reductionist approach. What does it mean to be a bat? You can picture yourself as what it's like to be a bat, because you can never sense yourself. You can never have the sense data a bat has. Why? Because you're not a bat. So anyways, that's all I really wanted to talk about. Super quick, super short. Let me know what you think. Principal Assert says, "Cut down on the exclusionary jargon. My partner does this and it's infuriating. Both atheism and conventional theism are spent forces." I beg to differ. I think that people should know a little bit about the jargon. It's not meant to be exclusatory. It's meant to include and be able to have people go out there and read about these things. If you don't know what the jargon means, how are you going to understand it? If you don't know the difference between non-reductive and reductive physicalism, or ontological naturalism versus ontological methodological naturalism. So there's ontological naturalism, methodological naturalism, ontological physicalism, and ontological methodological physicalism. And there's different approaches. Methodological physicalism, you know what another word for methodological physicalism is? Science. And what does science use? What does science use? Methodological naturalism. So methodological naturalism is the thesis that it uses in order to do science, which is basically just methodological physicalism. See, I mean, the jargon gets confusing, but I think it's important for people to know. I really do. Yeah, well, we got to remember that my channel is not really for new people coming around. My channel talks about this stuff for atheists and non-believers, especially, that want to kind of learn these things. And I'm going to put this in my series for lessons and learning about atheism, because it's not really for the new people. But if the new people come around, then yeah, we'll break it down a little bit more. But I really just wanted to touch base on this particular topic, because I had some people message me. And then another one was basically people not understanding color or realism. And let me just touch on that real quick. The difference between color realism and color realism is that there is some entity out there called color. But the color realist says, yeah, but it's phenomenological. If without a mind, there is no such thing as color. Colors have to exist, minds have to exist to apprehend, process, and determine the color as a something that's phenomenon in the brain, just like a dream. Nobody will sit there and say dreams have some kind of concrete presence. They don't. But you need a mind to have a dream. You need a brain to have a mind. Therefore, the dreams supervene on the brain. That's exactly how you would look at it. The dream requires the brain, or the mind, and the mind requires the brain in that approach. Now, by the way, the substance dualist, that may not hold to. The substance dualist says that, mind's a very different substance, and the mind doesn't require the brain. And of course, this allows for things like spirits, ghosts, demons, devils, and God, right? Now, I think you kind of necessarily have to be a substance dualist in some ways to accept those kinds of things. However, the color realist is just basically saying, sure, there's wavelengths, there's frequency, there's energy levels, but those energy levels are just energy. There's no phenomenon that's attached to any of those things. There's no phenomenon that's attached to a photon. A photon is just energy. That's it, and it's vibrating at some specific frequency, which is the inverse of the wavelength. That's it. That's all it's doing. Your mind is what's processing that, and your mind is interpreting that and trying to apprehend it in a way that makes sense. And the way it does that is it produces these colors. That's what color realism is. So colors don't exist in the real world. They only exist in the mind itself, inside of a person. And a lot of people have a hard time understanding that because they don't understand the difference between a color as an ontological presence and a color as a actual phenomenon, which the color realist will hold. So you have to think of it as external to internal. The colors exist internal because they're a phenomenon. And some people, there was even a theory, and it was called projectivism at one time, that said, okay, we accept this, but then we project that color onto the object, right? When we see that color in our head, we're projecting it onto the object, and so the object looks like color. But if there was no minds, there is no color. And some could even argue even more, if there's no minds, there's no universe to even apprehend in some ways. This is what I wrote about a while back with Delon. Is that how you pronounce her name? Delon from Babylon 5, saying that we are the way the universe understands itself, because we are comprised of the same material as the universe. And the universe without us couldn't understand itself. And we don't necessarily mean by some kind of intentional state. It just means that, because the universe doesn't have an intentional state, but we are part of the universe and we have intentional states. So because we are part of the universe and we understand the universe, well, we have the ability to understand, right? We have the ability to observe and formulate opinions and thoughts and have ideas. And basically we can apprehend something that a rock can't. And so that's why they say we are how the universe understands itself, because we are part of the universe and we do understand that the universe exists. We understand there's something to be observed. We understand that if we look at this and we see a specific color, that our minds are showing us this particular color. Some colors don't even have corresponding frequencies. They're just complementary colors. Magenta is a complementary color of green. Magenta doesn't really exist. It's just phenomenological. Pink doesn't exist. I think also gold, silver, purple maybe don't even exist, if I remember. But again, all of it, you really get Principal Sturdy says, my partner has a woke PhD. I might be arguing with you by proxy. That's funny. I like that. Oh, don't tell me that she has a PhD in gender studies or something. But anyway, I just want to touch on that again, because I think a lot of people are just misunderstanding some of these topics, and they're just leaving comments with the great. I love the comments, but I'm trying to explain to them, and then they're just condemning me for me explaining to them, because everything I've said so far, particularly in this video, I don't think is that controversial. I'm literally explaining the concepts, whether you agree with them or not, whether you tend to substance dualism or monism, that is irrelevant to what these things mean in the literature. And if you think that means something different in the literature, correct me, and I would love that. And I'll be, oh yeah, I screw the pooch on that. But don't argue against a thesis saying that I'm wrong on it, when I'm just telling you what the thesis is saying, and that this is my particular position. I'm giving my position for it. And you can say, sure, my position is wrong, but you cannot do that objectively, because you just have a different thesis than I do. You can objectively show that I will make a mistake and say, property dualism when I mean substance dualism, or vice versa, because that happens. But that's a completely different thing. That's something objective. You can go look and say, oh, look, there's a difference here. Steve, you meant to say one thing and you said another. But anyways, I am going to wrap it up. Hey, Kawasa. Hey, but I know I moved a lot of wrenches the other day, and did I move yours? Is that actually your YouTube account, Kawasa? I thought the icon is different. Is this an alternate account? Because I don't remember removing you as a mod. I did edit a lot out. I just took it down to like a couple people. But is that really you, Kawasa? Well, I don't know who would pretend to be Kawasa, but let me know and I'll fix it. If this is like an alt account or just we had didn't you have him on? Oh, it was on the other channel. I don't remember. I don't remember. Anyways, I think maybe it was just on the non sequitur show. But I'm going to wrap this up. Like I said, I wanted this to go short, keep it under 30 minutes. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know if this helped clarify some of the confusion on physicalism. But as I said, if you're an atheist and you're out there and you're arguing ontological physicalism and there is no God, then that's fine. But just remember that when somebody challenges you on the mental states, there are ways of getting around that. Okay, because I want to help the atheists have better arguments, because people were arguing that, oh, the atheist is arguing this, but I have, these arguments with trees and blades of grass and tornadoes, I guess, that undercut that particular argument of some kind of physicalist approach, and it just doesn't work. All right, guys, thanks for watching. I'm glad that this little restream worked. That's interesting. I wish it could go to Rumble though, so that it doesn't. Anyways, thanks for watching, guys. Oh, I didn't even know I can do this too. Oh, wait. Can I do this before I go, chat? Oh, see, I forgot. I saw this earlier that you can actually put things on the screen now. Isn't that cool? I should have done that all along. Oh well, next time, guys. Thanks for watching this. And tomorrow I have the I don't even want to describe him. The non-compromising genius of George Lujack on the Non Sequitur show. Probably the greatest creationist that I've ever had on the show, bar none. And I do say that tongue in cheek because it was the greatest dumpster fire ever, and I don't expect any difference. This time, George is going to dazzle us with his brilliance that he's learned over the last 4 years about evolution and physics. And Reds Rhetoric and I are going to host that tomorrow. He's going to be my co-host, and it's going to be glorious. So look forward to that, guys. And I will give you guys a good night. Thank you. Thank you, Cornelius. Great program, Steve. Appreciate it.